That's terrific. Hey, good afternoon, everybody. Seems like just yesterday we were here, but maybe it was months ago, right? Time flies. Anyway, so we want to thank you for being here today, and today's December 15th. This is the day in which we submit a budget, and this budget that we're submitting, as always, is a talking point with the legislature. It also reflects values. It also reflects what our revenue picture looks like, our savings, and where we're headed in terms of discussions, again, with the legislature. So I want to talk about a couple items at about 10,000 feet, and then we can get into some detail. And then we will, I'll have a couple of the commissioners comment on some items as well, and then Jeff will start to field some questions. But so I'm going to go down the list here on some talking points and some main points, actually, to impart upon Alaskans and you folks here in the room today. So our FY23 revenue estimates are down $1.8 billion from when I signed the current budget in June. And as we know, oil prices go up, they go down, especially in the chaotic situation that we have going across the world right now with wars in the Ukraine and policy decisions regarding fossil fuels, et cetera. We continue to have prices on oil and gas going up, going down, going all over the place. The FY24 budget is projected to have a deficit of $265 million. That $265 million will come out of the CBR, and what will be left in the CBR is approximately $2 billion remaining in the CBR. We're going to put forth a fully funded statutory PFD. Education is fully funded in this budget. We do understand, and we look forward to having discussions with the legislature on what that education funding will look like going forward. We certainly understand there's inflationary issues that need to be addressed, and so we look forward to that discussion. The ferry system is fully funded. Capital budget of approximately $200 million will be used to match federal dollars that could leverage $1.7 billion. PCE is fully funded. Higher education is fully funded. WWAMI, we're asking for an increase of $2 million to provide 10 additional slots for medical students here in Alaska. Resources are being put into research for the Yukon and Kuskokwim rivers with regard to fisheries. Fisheries has been a big issue, and it's going to continue to be a big issue, and we're going to work with everybody and anybody associated with fishing to get a better understanding and put in place policies that will help address some of the issues that we're dealing with the fishing situation across Alaska. The overall operating budget, the UGF spend of this budget is down 4% since 2019. So since we came into office, the agency operating side of the budget is down 4%. And we've also retired millions of dollars in debt during that time. Couple highlights, additional highlights of the budget. We're looking at a $25 million request that'll go through AEA for rural power system upgrades, bulk fuel upgrades, hydro development, and renewable energy and efficiency projects, as well as grid resiliency. $5 million to Market Alaska will go to the Department of Economic Development, and our commissioner will talk about that here a little later, so that we can continue to try and diversify our economy and get investors to look at Alaska. Public safety capital investments of about $14.2 million to help remodel posts and expand posts for patrol vessel replacement and investigative and forensic electronic equipment as well. Also with the Department of Public Safety, we're looking at an ask of $3.3 million, which will help fund 30 positions to help with administrative functions for the Department of Public Safety. This is going to help us get our troopers use the vast majority of the time to be out patrolling and doing their job, keeping us safe, and these administrative positions will help support that. We're looking at a $5 million ask for rural professional housing. As we know, we've been putting money into teacher and health professional housing in rural Alaska for some time. We feel a need to expand that, especially because of our OCS issues, for example, child services. We're finding it more and more difficult to secure housing for those folks as well out in rural Alaska. $10 million will go into the UA drone program. We feel strongly that Alaska could be the drone capital of the United States and potentially the world because of our airspace, as well as the research that the university is doing. And given what's happening right now in the Ukraine-Russian war, in which drone technology is an essential part of that unfortunate conflict, I think it bodes well for the Alaska and the United States to look at Alaska as a center for drone technology. As mentioned, $2 million to expand WWAMI, and we're going to also ask the legislature for $11 million for statehood defense investments so that we can be prepared to fight the federal government and other entities that wish to damper or otherwise shut off our ability to develop our resources here in the state of Alaska. That money will also go towards funding research, science, and legal costs. We're going to ask for $4 million for new recreational cabins and park sanitation. The cabins and some of our sanitation stations will be developed so that Alaskans and visitors with disabilities can access the great outdoors as well. We're looking at a $9.5 million initiative in our Healthy Family Initiative to address congenital syphilis and tuberculosis in Alaska, and to recruit and retain health professionals to our state and expand postpartum Medicaid coverage for mothers who have just given birth. $6.4 million will go into DED for the second year of the Reading Bill, the Reading Act. We're going to be asking for a $4.6 million capital ask for the Department of Fish and Game for food security that will help with increasing herds of certain animals, Alaska Marine Salmon Program, Arctic fisheries, and Central Region Fisheries Management with regard to sonar replacement. We're going to be asking for a $3 million increment to help with putting in three-phase power up in the Delta Farm complex to assist farmers with having the ability to, if they need to, use dryers for grain and for hay. We do have somewhat of a wet harvest season time in Alaska compared to other places in the lower 48. So this upgrade will help farmers be able to dry their crops and do other types of processing on their farms. Department of Corrections, we're asking for $4.1 million at Point Mac to help with a freezer approach to processing farm products and farm produce grown here in the state of Alaska that hopefully will help us feed our prisons across the state. And we look at potentially expanding that program to feed other state agencies as well, schools, et cetera. $2 million as part of labor for a pilot project that'll be implemented up in the Matsu Regional Hospital for daycare. We know that's been a big discussion here in Alaska and across this country, and we want to be able to put this pilot project in place and observe whether we can expand such approaches in Alaska, and what we would have to do that to make sure that it's cost effective for the state and meets the needs of parents. Department of Health, $1.5 million for community-based senior grants. This is a cost of living increase. And another $1 million for ANSEP, the Alaska Native Science and Engineering Program Partnership. And we're going to be putting $2.5 million into our Department of Military and Veteran Affairs for our State Defense Force. And in Alaska, you have the National Guard, and we've always had a State Defense Force as well. And when we went out to observe the damage from the typhoon, it was pretty obvious to us that having boots on the ground, in which we did have some State Defense Force individuals out there, it proved to be very helpful. And so this is an opportunity to expand that Defense Force, especially in rural Alaska, to deal with what we know is eventually going to be more disasters that hit this state, whether they're earthquakes, weather events, volcanoes, et cetera. And then I just want to talk briefly about a promising new revenue source, which I think Alaska can capitalize on, and that's the monetization of carbon. We hear a lot about carbon nowadays, especially as it pertains to climate change, global warming, et cetera. And Alaska has a real opportunity to sequester carbon in many different ways in the state. Through our forests, through our depleted oil and gas basins, as well as the potential for seaweed sequestration off our coasts. Australia, Europe, other locales in the lower 48 partake in this approach. Some of our native corporations have done this since 2015. But Alaska has a real opportunity to realize a new revenue source that could actually rival the revenue we get in some cases from oil. We're talking several $100 million a year to over $1 billion a year. So we'll be introducing a bill that will enable us to have those discussions with private entities, to be able to set up contracts, to be able to contract with Alaska with regard to the sequestration of carbon. We're going to have a lot of lunch and learns, a lot of discussions here early in the spring. But if the bill is passed that we put through, it will enable us to begin discussions in earnest with outfits to begin the process of securing this new revenue source. And at that point, I'd ask Revenue to come to the podium to just talk briefly about the revenue situation, and then I guess we'd turn it over to Jeff for, oh no, sorry. We'll have some of our commissioners come up first. So before we do that, let's have Commissioner Sandy come up and say a few words on initiative she's working on.
Good afternoon. Thank you, Governor. My name is Julie Sandy, and I'm the Commissioner of Commerce, Community, and Economic Development. Thank you. I have to do this a lot after he's done speaking, sorry. There we go. Thank you. And I just wanted to thank all of you for being here today. I'm excited to talk about a couple of the budget items that we have for FY24. When Governor Dunleavy asked me to serve originally, we talked about what the state can do to make Alaska the best place to live, to raise a family, to invest, and to work. I'm so excited that this year's budget gives DCCED $5 million to promote Alaska, our resources, our people, our opportunities. We have the highest standards in resource development, safety, and environmental protection. The quality of life and recreation opportunities in our state are unmatched. It's time we go out and we tell that story. Our initiative will involve proactively promoting Alaska through media and outreach as a state with the highest standards for environmental protection, sustainable development, and quality of life for our workforce. Targeted industry outreach will tell Alaska's story and provide information about the untapped opportunities throughout the state and attract investors to participate in Alaska's economy. Providing a coordinated voice for state agencies in responding to concerns and fears regarding existing and future development within Alaska. And finally, we want to make sure that when people choose Alaska as a place to invest, that we can offer them a single point of contact to assist in navigating the complexity of state and federal permitting within Alaska, and to get that project over the finish line. This program will be part of a comprehensive strategy to promote key industries like minerals, forest products, transportation logistics, and mariculture, just to name a few, that are critical to the economic success in Alaska. North to Opportunity is more than just a motto. It's our promise, and now it's time for us as a state to leverage that and to educate the rest of the world on who we are. Alaska is the cleanest, most responsible place for development of critical resources. If we don't develop those resources, that demand will be filled by countries that do not have the same environmental or humanitarian standards as we do here in Alaska. Alaska already markets tourism and seafood so well. This renewed effort will complement those existing programs and bring attention to Alaska's unique products, our services, and our people. Thank you. And Commissioner Hedberg.
Great, thank you, Commissioner, and good afternoon. Heidi Hedberg, Acting Commissioner for the Department of Health. And I'm here to talk about one of the governor's new initiatives. And what we know is that strong families are the foundation to a healthy society and a vibrant economy. This is a fundamental principle and is the catalyst for the governor's Healthy Family Initiative. And it has 3 pillars. The first pillar is healthy families. The second pillar is improving access to health care. And the third pillar is healthy communities. This is a multi-agency, multi-year effort to improve the collaboration and coordination across our state. It's going to focus on making Alaska the healthiest and best place to raise a family and the greatest place to work. So I think that you're going to see a theme here with the prior commissioner. This really is the focus for the next 4 years. Each of these pillars encompasses multiple strategies and tactics, and it includes a lot of administrative actions, statutory changes. There will be budgetary and staffing adjustments, and again, cross-collaboration across agencies. So to dive in just a little bit, the first pillar is healthy beginnings, and it's really the cornerstone of healthy families. This pillar prioritizes maternal and child health. It emphasizes prevention measures for youth like healthy diets and physical activity, and works towards expanding and improving child care and after-school programs. The second pillar is improving access to health care, and it's addressing access to both mental and physical health care, which is fundamental, again, to healthy families. This pillar is going to focus on working with our partners to create that robust and resilient healthcare workforce. It's also going to be supporting aging in place for our elders and really aligning how we pay for healthcare to reflect better outcomes, higher value for the whole person of care. The third pillar is healthy communities. And it's really building on the existing efforts to create healthy workplaces and work with partners to increase safe and affordable housing. It will also reduce the burden of infectious diseases such as tuberculosis and address chronic diseases by launching the Fresh Start campaign, which is really connecting Alaskans to free prevention services. So, in overview, this initiative is really going to be supporting all of Alaskans, really focusing on that strong foundation. We are leveraging ongoing federal funds, new federal funds, and in this budget is $9.5 million of general funds. I also want to acknowledge that collectively, all of these strategies is really, again, going to work together as we're working across state agencies and really creating Alaska to be the best place to raise a family. Thank you.
Good afternoon. I'm Treg Taylor. I'm the Attorney General for the state of Alaska. I am pleased that the governor's budget includes an increased funding for statehood defense, which helps assure that Alaskans determine Alaska's future and not a bureaucrat in D.C. I applaud the governor's efforts to aggressively protect the fundamental rights promised to Alaskans and the state at statehood. These fundamental rights include the ability of Alaskans to use state lands and waters and to responsibly develop its natural resources. The main reason we became a state was so that we could develop these resources on behalf of our nation. Statehood defense is not simply implemented by my department. While the Department of Law initiates litigation when necessary, defends against litigation, participates in administrative processes, and provides legal advice and research, we primarily represent our clients, and it's these clients that are doing the heavy lifting in statehood defense. Example, DNR, they deal with the access to lands, waters, and title issues. Fish and Game manages fish and game, performs research on species for ESA and MMPA purposes. DEC pursues state authority over programs and permit decisions. And of course, the governor's office provides oversight and policy direction in the statehood defense effort. The governor does not view statehood defense as an optional effort, nor should the legislature. We have to defend the rights we received at statehood and those provided by our Constitution, or we lose the ability of self-determination. Alaska's future has and always will be tied to its ability to responsibly develop its natural resources, oil and gas, minerals, fish and game. We rely on this development for revenue and for good paying jobs for Alaskans and their families. And we develop these resources cleaner and better than anyone else in the world. I'll end with the words of Ernest Gruening, former Alaska Territorial Governor and U.S. Senator. He said, "The development of Alaska, the fulfillment of its great destiny, cannot be achieved under federal control. The whole nation will profit by an Alaska that is populous, prosperous, strong, and self-reliant." These words remain as true today as they were then. Thank you, and Commissioner Anderson.
Okay, thank you and good afternoon. Ryan Anderson, the Commissioner of the Alaska Department of Transportation and Public Facilities. It's great to be here today and talking about the Alaska Department of Transportation and Public Facilities budget, where we're continuing to build momentum on all the great work that's been had over the past year in areas like safety, state of good repair and fixing our roads, our bridges, all the infrastructure out there, resiliency, economic development and vitality, and also sustainability. We're really working all of those areas in the budget and really excited about this opportunity that it brings to improve our operating and our capital programs. For our operating budget, this budget really builds and assists all of our folks, our maintenance forces, the folks that are out there plowing the roads. It funds our maintenance camps as we move forward. Camps such as Silvertip on the Seward Highway, or the Chitna Maintenance Camp, or the Birch Lake Camp on the Richardson Highway. This takes what we've done over the past year and just keeps working on it, and we're excited about that. We also have to remember it funds our airport system across the entire state. The state of Alaska has the largest state-owned and operated airport network in the nation, and this budget takes care of that. And also with our marine highways and our waterways out there, this budget continues that important work to operate that system, and it's going to continue to help us address our challenges with workforce and these things out there that are real and we're working through. So it's great on that front. On the capital side, of course, we are now seeing the full benefits of the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act and the increases in infrastructure funding that came through that. This budget allows us to accept those federal dollars, fully leverage those federal dollars with match, and also it invests $1.4 billion into our transportation system. This helps fix our roads. It improves safety on some of these important highway safety corridors. It'll improve our economic vitality. We're working through a new areas such as ice roads in the rural areas to improve connectivity, and also things like resiliency and sustainability. You're going to see more and more from us on that as well. And I just want to bring to light too that transportation in Alaska is so challenging with all modes, and it goes all the way from northern Alaska when you're talking about places like Barrow down to Homer, out the Aleutians to the east coast, the west coast of Alaska, down in southeast and southwest Alaska. It's all encompassing all modes of transportation with highways, aviation, and our waterways with the marine system as well. And this budget takes care of those. We're excited. I think we're going to be able to do some great things over this next year. And I want to thank the governor for this budget that keeps Alaska moving and really improves all modes of transportation throughout the state.
Do you want to talk about the two revenue sources? DOR Commissioner Crum will talk a little bit about revenue.
Thank you, sir. Adam Crum for the Department of Revenue. So for this fiscal year, FY23, our recent forecast in the RSB, the Revenue Sources Book, which has just been released, is projecting that FY23 is going to end with an average of $88.45 a barrel. For FY24, it's going to be at $81 a barrel. As the governor said, this is further down than what it was in the spring forecast, but as we know, oil is volatile. Just today alone, it is up 7% over the last week. So this is going to be a number that's going to continue to change, and we'll continue to give our monthly updates across the board for the cash management purposes. For the POMV purposes, coming from the Permanent Fund Corporation, it's actually an increase this year for FY24 of $165 million to be $3.5 billion deposited into the ERA. So this is the numbers that we're looking as this budget was built off of, and I thank the governor for putting this together today.
Thanks. So So no major reductions and no major adds, but basically this budget is down 4% since 2019 in terms of operating. And for the total budget, year over year, it's down almost 15%. Capital budget is down significantly. Last year we had a large capital budget. This year it's much smaller, and our operating budget is also down year over year. So with that, Jeff, I think we open up for questions.
Okay, for a quick reminder for the reporters on the Zoom, please keep your end muted until I call on you for a question. The background noise makes it hard for people here to hear. We'll start in the room with Mark Sabatini with the Juneau Empire.
Thank you. You want me to take this? Okay. I'm going to read one paragraph on a statement that Senate President Stevens just sent out. I do have some concerns with the proposed PFD amount, no additional resources for education funding, a skeleton version of a capital budget, and the possibility that we may need a supplemental budget for FY 2023 because of the decline in oil revenues. Do you want to respond to that?
What aspect do you want me to respond to? Just the overall?
It's his overall statement. I could ask you about each
No,
one
so we briefed the Senate President and others today. We're looking forward to a robust discussion like we always do. This is a beginning budget. As was mentioned by the Commissioner of DOR, next week we could be up another 17%, 20% in oil prices and revenue, depending upon the chaotic conditions in the world. We could be down 20%. So this, again, this is a beginning budget. We look forward to the discussions. But I think it's a reasonable budget. I think it continues to move Alaska forward. And, it's no secret that I've always erred on the side of the people of Alaska. And we will continue to have discussions about the permanent fund and the permanent fund dividend. But if you look at the chart to my right, things haven't gotten cheaper in Alaska for people, especially in rural Alaska. And I've got to keep that at the forefront when we do a budget. How does this budget impact individual Alaskans? And approximately 660,000 individuals partake in the permanent fund dividend program. During this last campaign season, I had countless people come to me, some in tears to be perfectly honest with you, thanking us for the efforts we made to be able to assist them in some very difficult times. I've had some older folks come to me thanking me for the PFD because they said now we can hire some young people to cut wood for us. This is 2022 in a modern state, in a modern country, and people are thanking me because they're able to get folks to cut wood for them. So I'll always be a supporter of the permanent fund and permanent fund dividend. I think the overall budget is a great starting point. And again, we look forward to the discussions with the legislature.
Okay, now we'll go to Becky Bohr with the Associated Press.
Hi, Governor. This year's draw was split 50-50, and you know as well as anybody the difficult challenges the legislature has had in landing on a solution on the PFD. Do you think going back to a formula last used in 2015 represents a step backward in those conversations? And can you talk a little bit about why you settled on that versus something that you think could be a workable formula going forward?
Again, we think the current conditions with inflation is one of the reasons, but also we're introducing a new revenue measure. It's going to be interesting how that conversation goes, because for years the conversation on revenue was whose ox are we going to gore? Are we going to do an income tax on the people of Alaska? Are we going to do corporate taxes? With the advent of the monetization of carbon, we have a real possibility of receiving revenue that doesn't gore any ox. And that revenue that could come in could be significant. And so really we want to have a discussion about overall fiscal plan going forward. We have introduced just about every year spending limits, constitutional limits, and constitutional safeguards on the permanent fund. We're willing to have the discussion as to what the permanent fund dividend looks like going forward, but it's got to be comprehensive. And I think, and I've said this every year, we have a real opportunity to straighten out the fiscal issues for Alaska. And it's going to be whether people want to have genuine conversations, whether people are going to look at the overall fiscal health of Alaska, not just for next year, but for the next 50 years. and whether people want to focus on personalities or solving problems. I want to focus on solving problems. I think we have the tools in our hands to be able to do that. But again, it's just got to be discussions. And given the makeup of the state, which I think the elections have demonstrated, you have people that have a multitude of opinions on things like the permanent fund. But again, it's no secret that I support the permanent fund. It's no secret that I got over 50% of the vote as part of that being part of the campaign. But I think we all want to solve issues here in the state of Alaska. It's just what are the things we can get around, and that's going to be the discussion we're going to have with the legislature.
Okay, now we'll go to James Brooks with the Alaska Beacon.
Thanks, Governor. How does the forward funding of education last year factor into this budget this year? How did you handle that? I understand that revenue is down and that'll be subtracted from the forward funding, but with what's left?
Basically the drop in oil prices practically zeroed that concept out. We haven't offered a reduction, and actually what we've said consistently is we understand that there will be a conversation to deal with the inflationary pressures that schools are seeing, and we're looking forward to that discussion. The question is going to be how large will that increase be and be settled upon at the end of the budgetary discussions. But we wanted to put forward a budget that is a budget that people can discuss logically and not emotionally. That's why you don't see large reductions, you don't see large additions. This is a budget that I think we can work off of. And so education funding is certainly going to be a discussion item that I look forward to, and I know others do as well. But I have faith that we'll come up with we'll arrive at some numbers that I think most Alaskans could agree with.
And just briefly to follow up on something you said you wanted to put forward a budget that folks can think about logically, not emotionally. Is it fair to characterize this as a cautious budget?
Cautious budget. No, I think it's a budget that represents the realities of Alaska, the current budget situation, which we know is volatile because of the way we get our revenues. But I also think it interjects some stability with the carbon discussion. Carbon is an actual commodity that can be monetized now, and significant monetization for the state of Alaska. So I think I wouldn't term this as a cautious budget. We anticipate the discussion of additions by the legislature into this budget. But I'm always going to say, how do we pay for it? We've offered, we've been oftentimes dinged by others, including in press conferences. Where is your revenue? Where is your fiscal plan? We have a revenue measure. We've introduced fiscal plans. We just need the legislature and the administration to sit down and come together and agree on some things. So I think the people of Alaska are looking forward to solutions as opposed to brawling. There'll be some robust discussions, there's no doubt about it, but I wouldn't term this as a cautious budget. It's a budget to build upon.
Okay, we have one more question in the room before going to the Zoom. Lisa Fu with the Alaska Beacon.
Hi, Governor. Can you talk more about the bill that will be introduced on carbon sequestration? What are you excited about? What do you anticipate to be like some sticking points?
So it's a brand new frontier for Alaska. As mentioned, some of our native corporations have been partaking in this since, I think, 2015. But the scale that Alaska has to offer on this is unprecedented. And it's unprecedented not just in the size of Alaska, but in the different methods by which carbon can be sequestered. And as a result of that, we're almost finished with a bill that we'll introduce that'll be the starting point for discussions as to what that would look like, how we can contract, what do we have in the contract, what lands will be contracted to be part of the sequestration, what basins will be part of the discussion for sequestration, what will our coast look like in a few years if there are private entities that wish to grow seaweed for the purpose of sequestering carbon. Very new frontier, can be complicated. And so what we're going to be doing is we're going to be working with the legislature, having a lot of lunch and learns, having a lot of discussions. But we're hoping that we get some action on a broad bill that will enable us to start to entertain potential contracts with entities. So, Lisa, it's brand new. It's going to take a little bit of time for people to get their arms around. But we're hopeful that this discussion is at the forefront because, again, there's real possibility that Alaska can realize revenue in the hundreds of millions, if not $1 billion+ every year for a long period of time.
Okay, we're going to go to questions on the Zoom call. We'll take the first one from Jeff Landfield.
Hi, Governor. I just wanted to ask about last year you vetoed a $900 million transfer the legislature made into the SBR, so into the CBR, and the spokesperson said that was because the CBR is owed $12 billion. If the prices of oil stay low and a supplemental budget is required, do you favor, if these carbon credits, if this revenue doesn't pan out or doesn't arrive, do you favor a draw on the CBR? And if so, are you worried that legislators, in exchange for their vote, would want more spending?
No, Jeff, I'm not really worried about much of anything, to be honest with you. I mean, this is a discussion. It's a transactional discussion. There's various ways to put a budget together. We do believe there's a purpose for the CBR, and that's why we did want that money to go into it. But again, we're hoping that it's a sit down and a discussion for the future, not just this year, and not looking at the past year or two, but really looking at how do we come to terms on some of these longstanding issues. This is a real opportunity. You know, they talk about leadership. This is a real opportunity to really put that in play, to solve some of these longstanding issues on the budgets, on the fiscals. And so, again, last year the idea was that we put that money in the CBR because the Constitution calls for a repayment to the CBR. And I think that's also a discussion that needs to happen as we go forward. How do we deal with that constitutional provision that calls for a repayment? You know, it's interesting. I was just sworn in here not too long ago to defend and uphold the Constitution and the laws of the state of Alaska. Sometimes I get dinged on doing that. Sometimes I get dinged on supporting the Constitution, whether it has to do with the effective date or whether it has to do with things such as the CBR. I'm not going to, and I know you're not asking this, Jeff, but I'm not going to apologize for defending the Constitution. That's kind of crazy. And I'm not going to apologize for defending the laws of the state of Alaska, such as a statutory PFD. We should have the discussions, and if we can get enough people around certain issues that we can agree upon, we can change some of these things legally and constitutionally. So anyway, I'm not worried. I look forward to the discussions, and I'm hopeful that we're going to solve some problems this year.
Okay, and our next question comes from Jack Barnwell with the Fairbanks Daily News Miner. Jack?
Hi, Governor. Question on the capital budget in terms of the Delta Junction. Will you be considering other projects connected to agriculture?
Yeah, I'm sorry. Go ahead. Absolutely. If anything, the last couple of years should demonstrate to everybody, whether it's bare shelves, whether it's the high cost of items, whether it's our dependency on shipping by water and by air and over land through Canada, Alaska is really in a vulnerable position compared to other states. We have to grow more of our own food. We have to produce more of our own food. We have to process that food. We have to store that food. And we have to be prepared to distribute that food. This is not something new. Years ago, for example, under former Governor Parnell, he talked about making sure you had enough food on hand in case there was a disruption of the supply chain, way before COVID. And so I guess really what we need to look at is how many times do we have to be reminded that the shipments could stop. And for me, you don't have to remind me anymore. And this is one of the reasons why we're going to continue to work on this. So you're going to hear a lot more about food production, processing, storage here in the state of Alaska. We'll have some bills regarding agriculture that we're going to submit in the beginning of the session. But it's my goal that we make Alaska as independent as possible, not keep it as dependent as possible, so we could deal with some of these disruptions that certainly are going to occur in the future.
Okay. Governor, up next we have Sam Stockbridge with the Ketchikan Daily News.
Hi, Governor. Just a quick question on education again. You acknowledge the crunch that many school districts are facing next year. I'm wondering if you feel that your budget addresses those concerns adequately. And I'm also curious to find out if you think, what you think is needed to adequately address those concerns?
Well, again, we've stated up front that this is a base budget and that we expect the conversations to occur on how much additional money needs to go into education. We are going to have those discussions. We know that inflation is hitting our schools as well, the ability to conduct classes, purchase textbooks, pay for fuel, pay teachers. We know that. So what that amount's going to be, I can't answer that at this point. That's going to be a result of the discussions we have with the legislature and legislative action. So you're just going to have to follow those discussions as they unfold here over the next few months. But certainly, I would anticipate that you'll see increases in certain aspects of education funding.
Okay. Our next question is from Nat Hers with the Northern Journal. Nat?
Hey, can you guys hear me?
We can.
So, Governor Dunleavy, your one of the proposals here with the carbon credits talks about, or it seems to kind of acknowledge that, global warming is a thing. It's going to have impacts, potentially positive impacts on Alaska. I just spent the last week at the Northern Pacific Council listening to crabbers and subsistence fishermen sort of saying that they have been devastated by negative impacts of climate change on crab, on salmon. And so I'm wondering, if we're at this kind of a point, why shouldn't Alaska actually have or develop an overarching climate policy or dedicated group of individuals that are working on this issue to kind of manage the different and broad impacts we're seeing across the state?
Yeah, I want to make sure I understood that, Nat. Did you say why should or why should not?
Why should we not? Because you, as I'm sure you remember, eliminated that team and that policy at the start of your first term. Because,
well, in answer to your question, well, we're certainly having those discussions, and the question is whether we put together, quote, a task force. If we do that, we need to make sure that that task force is going to be lined out and has certain goals that can be met. We are taking the position that the world is changing. We're taking that position from a whole host of different angles. We agreed last year to put money in the port up in Nome. I think Nome is going to be a strategic city for the state of Alaska. Quite frankly, if it keeps warming at the rate it's warming, we're going to see more traffic, ship traffic coming through the Bering Strait. We're going to see, I think you're going to see more of a military presence here as a result of that warming Arctic, especially since we live in a dangerous neighborhood with folks to the west of us. And so I think, Nat, I don't be surprised if we continue down the road of putting together something that's going to acknowledge the fact that the world is warming, that the Arctic is warming, and that we're going to put forth policies that will address that.
Okay, and up next we have Elena Sims with Alaska's News Source. Elena?
Hi, folks. Governor, you've reiterated that the details of the matter of education funding are sort of pending the conversations with the legislature. I was curious if you could give us a bit of a sneak preview about the direction you want those discussions with the legislature to go.
Well, I'd want to have an honest and earnest discussion about what the legislature thinks in terms of amounts of money and where they go. As you know, there's always the issue of the BSA. You hear about the BSA all the time, but the fact is there's a formula that has other components in it. And so there may be discussions that go forward on an energy factor in that foundation. There may be one on a salary factor in that foundation. There could be a whole host of issues in that foundation. The foundation is somewhat complex for most people to understand. That was revised back in the mid-'90s. But I would anticipate a wide-ranging discussion on educational funding. There'll be a number of us, not just myself, but in the legislature as well, that's also going to want to ensure that there is accountability components in that discussion as well. What does that mean? That when some say a blank check, and I don't mean that in a negative, but we certainly have to fund our educational system. But we also have to demand that we get outcomes that most people, most parents, students, and others expect. Currently, by many measures, we're 49th out of 51 school districts in the country. state educational systems in the country. I'm sorry. We could do a lot better than that. So we're certainly going to have discussions on funding and budgets. I think we also have to have, not to complicate the issue, but it's a flip side of the same coin. We've got to make sure that we have outcomes. We took a big step last year with reading. That's why we're putting money into the second year of reading in this budget. But I think you're going to see continued discussions on things like mathematics and science and so forth. So I can't tell you where this is going to go. I can't tell you how much money, but I can tell you that that is going to be a central conversation for everybody down here in Juneau this session.
Okay, our next question is from the Anchorage Daily News and political reporter Iris Samuels. Iris?
Thank you. Governor, I'm wondering if you have an estimate for how much money the carbon sequestration measure can bring into Alaska, and if you do have any sort of estimate, what that's based on, if there's been any research on this, and then more broadly, how you landed on this type of measure to bring in more revenue to the state rather than other types of revenue generation.
Yeah, it's a great question. So the reason we landed on this is it doesn't gore any ox. And more importantly, it's in line with Alaska's, what Alaska does, and that's resources. So generally speaking, when you deal with Alaskan resources, it's the development of and then the severance of a resource out of Alaska in which we get compensation through severance taxes and royalties. Since carbon is now being monetized across the world, it allows Alaska to be the sequester of, bringing it into Alaska and sequestering it. Whether we're looking at carbon transfer credits, with regard to forest, whether we're looking at sequestering that in a basin. And the reason we talk about sequestering it in the basin is carbon used in certain ways is not just bad, but it's also good. We import carbon, CO2, to Alaska with regard to, dry ice. It's in our sodas. It's in other types of products as well. And so carbon has already been monetized from that perspective, but we get to monetize it again through the sequestration process. As our pipeline inches along, and it's still moving forward, potential partners such as the Japanese value the ability to sequester carbon, especially when they're looking at becoming a hydrogen hub in Asia. And so when you start off by developing hydrogen, for example, through gas, which they refer to as blue hydrogen, you have a carbon molecule that you have to deal with, and you have to put it somewhere. A perfect place to put it is in a depleted basin such as Cook Inlet. We have other depleted basins here in Alaska. As a matter of fact, Alaska probably has more capacity to sequester carbon underground than anywhere on the West Coast. And our proximity to Asia bodes well for that. The amount of money you can derive from this carbon process, that's difficult to put a finger on. But I would say this, we haven't even begun to calculate the sequestration concept in terms of monetization. In other words, do you monetize it X amount of dollars per ton? We could store upwards of 50 gigatons of carbon, for example, Cook Inlet. 50 gigatons of carbon represents all of the carbon that Japan would use for 50 years. That's an enormous amount of carbon. That's just in Cook Inlet. So those calculations, and we'll have experts on board. I am sure that the legislature will too, and they should, so we can thoroughly understand how to best maximize this potential. We have some examples existing here currently in Alaska with some of our native corporations that have been partaking in this process at least since 2015. But I would say this, just in the concept above ground with regard to some of our forests, we're looking at potential monies in the hundreds of millions to $1 billion, $1.5 billion. Potentially over 20 years, you could be looking at upwards of $30 billion with a B, just in that process alone. We haven't even begun to calculate the sequestration process for our basins, and we are just beginning the conversations on the possibility of seaweed being used also along our coast, which we have the longest coastline compared to any other state in the country by far. So this is a new frontier with new possibilities, and we're going to do everything we can to get some hard and fast figures here over the next few months to be able to share with the people of Alaska and the legislature.
Okay, up next we have Amanda Bowman with the Fairbanks Daily News Miner. Amanda, do you have a question?
Last, excellent job. I'll pass.
Okay, let's move to Kavitha George with Alaska Public Media. Kavitha?
Hi, Governor, could you talk a little bit more about your ideas for a carbon sequestration industry in Alaska? You said it's a new revenue source that could rival oil, but how far away are we from the infrastructure developments and so forth that would allow that to happen? Are you thinking about this as a plan that could happen or see results within your second term?
I'm seeing the possibility of having results in the next several months, especially for the carbon process that deals with some of our forests. Absolutely. And then the concept of basins, I think you could start to see some real possibility here in the next year or two on that. So a lot sooner than most people think. Again, this is happening across the world, Australia and Europe, parts of the lower 48, and here in Alaska. Currently, it's been happening here since 2015 with some of our native corporations. So again, if we get the legislature to pass enabling language for us to begin the discussions with entities to see what what they're offering, we'll have a clearer picture as to how much we can make and how soon we can bring that revenue into the state of Alaska. And again, this isn't just one and done. The idea here is this is multi-year revenue, which will help stabilize our fiscal picture going forward.
Okay, and we have another question from Alaska Public Media, this time from Wesley Early. Wesley?
Hi, thanks, Jeff, and thanks, Governor. I don't want to necessarily beat a dead horse here, but this marks more than 5 years in a row of no adjustment to the base student allocation. And there are hundreds of job openings in Anchorage. I'm wondering how you can keep Anchorage schools and Alaska schools competitive when there's no adjustment to that. You've said that you're going to try to talk with the legislature about those inflationary problems, and you anticipate the amount going up that will go to education. But I'm wondering, if you anticipate that number going up, why not invest more in education from the get-go? It just seems like there's been a lot of years with no increase to education, and we're seeing Alaska become less competitive for teachers to teach here.
Well, there has been money put in education, but I would ask you this: how much? Give me a number. You wanted me to put a number in this budget? How much?
I mean,
don't say you don't know.
Well, I think 5 years in a row of not increasing it means that it's actually a decrease because inflation's going up, and so school districts are facing larger budget deficits. Anchorage School District has a $48 million deficit.
Right. So how much should I have put in this budget to deal with the question that you had?
I'm not the governor, and I'm not a school administrator. I just know that the deputy superintendent of the ASD told me last week that if the base student allocation would have been adjusted for inflation, they wouldn't have a deficit.
So I am the governor, and I've been a superintendent, and I've been a school board president of the second largest school district in the state of Alaska, and I've dealt with budgets. You have to have a discussion with the legislature and what factors they want to look at, what do they want to do with the BSA, and any other discussions related to education, transportation costs, et cetera. For me to put a number in the budget, some will say it's too little, some will say it's too much. So what we've done is we put forth a budget here on December 15th to begin that discussion. And I'd be willing to bet you a couple dollars that the number that you may be thinking in your head, and I don't know if you are, probably won't be the number that's agreed upon by the legislature. That's part of the process. So we're going to see testimony from educators, testimony from superintendents, teachers, you name it, that will be putting forth various figures and numbers. We understand that. But in terms of putting forth a number right now, I could tell you that people would say, you would be probably asking a similar question. Why did you put that amount in there instead of this? We've put forth a base student budget with no major reductions, no reductions really, in education, because we understand that there are inflationary pressures. We get that. And we are looking forward to the discussion on how to deal with that. And so right now it's a blank piece of paper for all of us to work on. I think there's going to be some good results that come out of those discussions.
Okay, and Governor, we are down to our last question from Shauna Crondall at the Alaska Education Update. Shauna?
Hi. I don't have any questions about carbon sequestration because my husband's involved in that. I know all about that. But education funding, it sounds like people, including you, are definitely focused on the fact that education funding is not keeping up with inflation.
Agreed. Is that a question or a statement?
Yeah. So
agreed.
It sounds like there's a definite push that there will be some sort of increase for education funding this year. Is that correct?
Highly likely, yes.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Hey, thanks for being here today. I think there's some exciting things happening here in Alaska with regard to the budget. There's some real opportunities with the budget. I'm sure that the carbon issue will have people scratching their heads, but as we roll out more information, I think it'll become clearer that Alaska can really take advantage of this situation and really monetize carbon in all of its forms. I'm looking forward to working with the legislature. And, throughout this process, as we always see, you're going to hear people say certain things. There will be people that may be negative on this issue or that issue. But in the end, we'll craft the budget. But I just want the people of Alaska to know that over the past few months, I've listened very carefully to them as to what are the things that are important to them. Certainly schools are important to them. Certainly transportation and maintenance of roads is important to them. Certainly the PFD is important to people as well. And so if we go into this process with an open mind, but an understanding that we all want to solve issues, that we all want to focus on the issues instead of personalities, I think we can get some great things done here in the state of Alaska. And as a matter of fact, I think we can build in Alaska not just for tomorrow, but for our kids and our grandkids for the next 50 years. And that's what we need to look at. What is Alaska going to look like in the next 50 years? Can we feed ourselves? Can we heat ourselves internally? Are we prepared to deal with shipping in the Arctic and take advantage of that? Do we have a fiscal plan that makes sense and is a durable one that goes out for years? Are we making sure that we're capitalizing on our resources? I think we have tremendous opportunity here. I've always said I think we got the greatest motto in the entire country, and that's North to the Future. And this legislative session is a new possibility for some great solutions to some problems. So looking forward to working with the legislature and having some very robust discussions on the future of Alaska. So with that, I want to thank all of you for being here. Thank you.